Tim Hampton, and again, we're going to discuss some findings from my topic of assessing fungicide and feral applications in soybeans. But before we dive into that, just a little bit of background on myself. I was born and raised in northwest Kentucky. Here's kind of the roadmap to Ames. Didn't quite go that way the other night, but we did the best we could. So it was about 9.5 hours to Ames. But what I just want to focus on is here's home, about 20 miles south of Owensboro, Kentucky, about metro area of about 55, 60,000 people. We were about 15 miles south of that in a county, McLean County, which is very rural, very agricultural. About 10,000 people in the county, one stoplight, just to kind of give you a picture of where home is. But we're situated 2 hours north of Nashville, 2 hours west of Louisville, 3.5 hours each way to Indy or St. Louis. So when you look at the state of Kentucky, it's very diverse as well, as far as especially going west to east. Of course, we get farther east we go, the more mountainous we have. But when you get west in the state, it becomes a lot more of a floodplain, much more flat kind of country that a lot of alluvial, a lot of river tributaries going into the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers. Agriculture changes as well as what we're growing and how we grow it. A lot of diverse, we used to have a lot of tobacco in the state. Now, and of course, that's kind of diminished over the years, but mainly we are no-till, that is corn, soybeans, and we'll no-till our wheat into our corn stubble. The farther in the central part of the state, we have a large bourbon or distillery industry, a lot of corn going to those markets as well. So smaller fields, but a lot of corn going to that market. As far as family goes, my wife who's with me today is Amanda, my son Jake who's 3, and my daughter Mallory who's 6, and these are my parents, Ron and Kay. We like to vacation in the South as much as we can, Alabama or Florida, and wherever we are, we like to fish. So I was really proud of Mallory this past fall. That's her first speckled trout. She did that all by herself. So education and work experience. I graduated from Western Kentucky University in 1998, in Bowling Green, like I said, about an hour south of home. It's a regional type of school. Don't have an emphasis in agronomy or those type of disciplines. You have a bachelor's in agriculture, and you can kind of select which routes you want to go. And so the majority of my hours were split between agribusiness and agronomy to complete my BS in agriculture. My last 2 years in school, I worked for Pioneer as a sales assistant, put out strip plots, worked with customers, delivering seed just to kind of get my feet wet in the seed industry. After graduation, I went on into soybean breeding in Hamel, Illinois, and West Memphis, Arkansas. At that point in time, in 1998, if you remember, Roundup Ready soybeans were coming on pretty fast and pretty furious. Our job was to breed the Roundup Ready into the germplasm as fast as we could, and making those advancements, and not just selling F1, F2 derived type stuff. The move to Arkansas was an eye-opener. Rice and cotton and how that worked with soybeans was very diverse from what I was used to. I went on, came back home to Kentucky, worked for a testing facility that we analyzed soil samples, plant tissue samples. Had the opportunity to work for Peabody Energy. We strip mined through lots and lots of prime farmland in southern Indiana. And to put that back as to regulations, federal regulations, I was in charge of getting the production back on those fields to hit pre-mine standards. The led to a position with Crop Production Services, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. I've been a seed marketing manager and chemical marketing manager with that organization up until 2013, where I'm now with BASF as an innovation specialist. working with agronomy directly with growers. My big interest as far as farming goes, away from hobbies, but my big interest is in no-till farming. 50 years ago, a farmer just south of in Hopkins County, or Hopkinsville, which is on the Tennessee-Kentucky line, grew the first commercial no-till crop, which has kind of changed the way that agriculture in our part of the world anyway is produced. 70% of our wheat and 50% of our corn and 80% of our beans are all no-till. We can keep up with our no-till yields in soybeans, much like our conventional type of soybeans. Weed control strategies, whether it's wheat or corn or beans, it's going to be different than what we're using. Instead of using a mechanical device to control our weeds, in wheat it's a major deal to control competition in the fall. So we're using more herbicides in the fall for weed control in wheat. But the potential challenges that we see with no-till, we may have an increased amount of disease, soil temperatures lag a little bit, warming up in the spring, and of course residue management. So moving into the discussion, just a little bit of an intro. I think we just kind of need to understand what a fungicide is. Fungicides control plant disease by preventing or hindering their development. That's whether it's a preventive type, timed preventive application, or after maybe an infection that's occurred and we try to do a post-infection control. But how did fungicides get to the marketplace today as we know them? Agent soybean rust was a big discussion back in the early 2000s, first confirmed in Alabama in 2004. So soybean growers wanted to learn how to implement the fungicides into their crop plans to control prevent agent soybean rust. Well, looking back now 10 years, agent soybean rust hasn't been the economic conundrum that we may have thought it would have been. But we did learn from this, for the advancements in research and the funding that was put towards learning how to use fungicides in soybean. We learned that the R3 application, the R3 growth stage, was determined to be the highest yielding time of application. We also found that yield increases in the absence of disease were showing. Texas A&M had a study that showed in multiple years of around about a 20% increase in yield with no disease. Other effects on soybean yield, in addition to protection from plant disease, we're looking at enhanced plant growth, increased nodule formation, as well as the nitrogenase activity from those nodules. And so when you look at the growth from less than 1% in 2002 to 11% in 2012, and there's some recent DONES data here that's come out pretty recently. 2014, fungicide use grew to 14% of our soybean acres. So in a matter of 10 years, we've increased fungicide use on the farm. One thing I'd like to point out is what is R3 growth stage. Here's a nice little graph from the University of Illinois. At R3, you count down 4 nodes from the top, and if there's a pod on one of those 4 nodes that's 3/16 of an inch long, we're in R3, and that's our timed application. Speaking of some diseases in Kentucky, Septoria brown spot is predominant in every field that we have. University of Kentucky states that up to 15% yield loss can occur. The soybeans are infected early through splash from the ground into the lower canopy, infect the leaves, and it can cause the soybean plant to defoliate prematurely. So the infection in the lower canopy can move up through the canopy with favorable weather environment, which we've had the last couple of years, and it can be visible on the leaves and on the pods and then on the stems. And as you can see, these pictures, this is about a month after planting. You can see the Septoria starting. Here's a pic a little bit later on, moving on up. And of course, these beans here, it's later on in maturity, but you can tell that the septoria did make it up through the upper canopy during pod fill. Anthracnose. Anthracnose is another one of those diseases that we see just about every year in the state that can have a large potential for loss. Dr. Hartman from University of Illinois stated a large potential loss up to 16 to 26%, especially when we're planting into cool and early conditions, soil conditions, which we tend to do in no-till. It infects the leaves and the pods and then the stems. Symptoms aren't always visible until harvest, when we can start seeing those pycnidia on the stem there. And if we have a susceptible, the varieties can be susceptible at any time of their development as well. So it's not one of those things we can kind of go and look for. It's one of those diseases that we just kind of have to account for and try to manage the best we can. Frog eye leaf spot. This has gotten a lot of talk the last few years, especially in the Mid-South. The fungus survives mainly in soybean residue, and the spores are rain splashed and windborne. In the Delta, in the Mid-South, we do have a lot of river fields that don't always get corn in them, and so there is a lot of bean-on-bean acres on some of those fields. In West Tennessee, 5-year average loss of about 8% was documented by Dr. Melvin Newman, professor at University of Tennessee. And also, that loss can be even much more if we're using susceptible varieties and we have the right environment for that disease to develop, and it potentially could lose 30 to 50%. Resistance to strobilurins was documented in 2010 in Lauderdale County, which is northwest Tennessee. It was documented by Dr. Newman and confirmed by Dr. Bradley, University of Illinois. They confirmed that in 2010. Next year, Kentucky put a sampling out and said that 72% of their fields in Kentucky were found to be sensitive, and 28% of the isolates found to be resistant. 7 fields were sampled, and 2 fields were actually showing resistant there. So we have a lot of work as far as identification goes to see how this is spreading, but the work is being done. One thing I'd like to point out is this is a great picture as far as the symptomology goes. You have a lesion that is dark brown to purple on the edges with a light discoloration, light gray to tan discoloration in the middle, thus getting the depiction of a frog eye. Now, in a susceptible variety, when the disease really starts to develop and gets rolling downhill, you can have a blighting effect, and the leaves will wilt and defoliate, and that's where we get these big losses of 30 to 50%. I just want to touch on soil-borne diseases, Rhizoctonia, Fusarium, in our soils, Phytophthora, which is, is very variable as far as the races in our soil. We do have some genetic resistance available to us. This is just an example of a popular bean variety that we use that has the Phytophthora root rot resistance, RPS1C. There are other genes in that RPS that are available as well. Pythium, damping off. But we do have seed treatment offerings to help with these soil-borne diseases, and we have they're classified as broad range, broad spectrum, like a strobilurin, like Trilex or trifloxystrobin, which is in Trilex, has good control of several broad range diseases. Difenoconazole is another one, triazole. Then we have narrow type of spectrum of control that for like Pythium and Phytophthora, they're for those water modes that are essential, and middle axil is an example of that. So, why are we looking at in-furrow fungicides in soybean? Three reasons that I would like to point out is that the economic environment that we have today leans growers maybe planting towards more soybean acres. Also, broadcast foliar applications do not protect the seed or the seedling from soil-borne diseases, as well as there is an effect of the wheel track damage that when you do apply a fungicide at R3, that there is an economic loss there from running over the beans. And this chart from Purdue shows that if we're using a 90-foot wide boom, then we can expect about a 1.9% yield loss. So we can, by putting it in the row, we would not have that loss there from the in-season application. Where has this been done before? I could not find any research on soybean in-furrow fungicide applications in soybean, but I was able to find some in some other crops. In cotton, azoxystrobin was shown to have a higher germination percentage and less post-emergent loss when compared to even the seed treatment. Peanuts, azoxystrobin, suppressed aspergillus crown rot in the early season, did not have season-lasting control, but did have early season suppression. And in sugar beets, where a lot of work has been done up north, Azoxy, lower disease severity, increased percentage of healthy roots, and increased yields. But also, not only did we increase our quantity, we were also improving the crop with quality. So as recoverable sucrose was higher in the treated versus the untreated. And of course, it did help it with the rhizoctonia that they deal with in their soils by having less root rot causes and poor stands. My objectives of the study was to determine if in-furrow fungicide applications in soybean can affect yield, plant and root mass, stand count, and of course disease, as well as looking at what we're already doing at the R3 application, basically trying to make a sequential application between the in-furrow and the R3 application, and looking at yield, plant and root mass, and disease as well. One thing I'd like to point out, in the slides, if I have an IF, that stands for in-furrow. If I have an FB, it's followed by. I use those terms just to kind of save some space on some of these slides. However, our treatments and experimental design, well, I chose randomized complete block design. The treatments that were chosen was Quadris, which is azoxystrobin, which a lot of work had been done previous. So I thought that would be important to put that in. Headline EC from BASF is labeled for soybean in-furrow applications. I like that choice because it allows us to mix it with starter fertilizers. If a guy wants to use a little bit of a starter in his beans, he can use, the formulation allows him to do that. And Preaxor, which is a new fungicide, two modes of action, the pyraclostrobin, which is a strobilurin, and fludapyrazide, which is a carboxamide. So we're kind of looking at a two mode of action fungicide there. So those were my in-furrow treatments, and then I followed the headline and the Preaxor again at R3 with Preaxor at the R3 timing. A NOVA method used via ARM to determine the significance of the treatments, and we used the mean difference was assessed at the P.05 probability level using Duncan's. And you can see that there's my list of the treatments and the rates, as well as what the block look like. So where did we plant our plot? I chose Murray State University, which is in what we call the Purchase area of Kentucky. It's part of Jackson's Purchase, if you remember history. We have a site there, a research site that I had access to be able to plant the plot. We planted in 4-row plots, 30-inch rows, 25 foot in length. The data was collected in the middle 2 rows. I chose Pioneer 94Y70, untreated was our soybean variety, seeding at about 140,000 seeds per acre. Our silt loam, our Grenada silt loam was our soil type, which that's a predominant soil type for that area. Good productive soil at about 2% slope. Again, at Murray State University's farm, Planted June 21st, no-till soybean on soybean rotation. Why was it planted June 21st? That just happened to be the time that it got in the ground. We had some rains in June that year and delayed planting a little bit longer than I had liked. On the research farm, we have some weeds that a little hard to control these days. With glyphosate, we have resistant mare's tail and Palmer amaranth. So we used a 2 burn down application there, starting out with a verdict, which is a burn down plus a little bit of residual, and Roundup and Zidua, which is a totally residual product for grasses and small seeded broadleaves. We put that up front, and then at planting, to ensure that we do not have any palmer emerge coming up with our beans, we did spray a 40-ounce rate of gramoxone to make sure that we didn't have anything. 12 days after planting, we did come back and add another layer of residual to ensure no palmer or mare's tail emergence in season. We applied the in-furrow fungicide through a starter fertilizer system that the planter was equipped. That we would use, like in corn, we just use, instead of using the starter, we use water as our carrier at 4 gallons per acre. And at R3 timing, we would use our backpack sprayer calibrated for 15 gallons per acre of water. The data that was collected, I started with stand counts at the second trifoliate. I measured 17 feet 5 inches in row length, which would be about a 1/1000th of an acre, and a 30-inch row width. Plant samples were taken at R4. I chose 5 random plants, shovel, dig, wash the roots, wash the roots in a bucket, strain to make sure we got all of the roots through the strainer so we didn't lose any data, and cut the roots off at the soil line, and then we're able to bag the plant tissue and the root mass, root tissue, to take to the lab for the dry weight analysis. At R6, we came back to see what diseases we may have, and at the time we had septoria working in those plots. I was hoping that these would show up on the picture here. This is the preaxor followed by preaxor plot, and this is the quadrus plot, or azoxystrobin. What I was wanting to show here is you can see that there are more yellow leaves coming up through the upper canopy, and just to kind of depict what kind of movement we had through the upper canopy of septoria at that time. Rated on a 1 to 9 scale, 9 being the most disease. Lower and upper canopy was defined as, I was looking at the canopy at probably about 5 nodes from the soil surface would have been my first 5 nodes from the bottom would have been my lower canopy, and then from there to the top trifoliate would have been the upper. R8 we looked at, that was about 95% pod maturity. Wanted to look at percent defoliation and determine what that percent would be compared to the untreated or the control. The center 2 rows were given a visual rating, and the values given as a percentage of defoliation. Leaf defoliation can be considered a measurement of plant health and its benefit. We know that leaf defoliation is an indicator of plant maturity, as well as delayed maturity could result in increased yields. Right ahead of the combine, we looked at anthracnose, and center 2 rows again were evaluated compared to the control, again 9 being worst and 1 being the best. At harvest, with our little Massey, the center 2 rows were harvested. Of course, the grain weight recorded. Use a handheld Dickie John to measure the moisture, and the yield was calculated to 13%. So now we'll look at some of the results, and we'll look at yield first, and then some of the other measurables, stand count and the masses, disease and defoliation, and then last but not least, return on the investment. So we'll look at yield. Yield of the what I want to call sequential applications, which are the in-furrow followed by the R3 application, were significantly more than the control and the quadrus. As you can see the groupings, the A's would be where those sequentials are, and you can tell that the other in-furrow treatments were not significantly different than the control itself. In stand count, we did see a significant increase in stand versus the control in all treatments, in all in-furrow treatments were significantly more than the control in stand count. Root and plant mass. The darker bar would be our root mass, and our lighter orange would be plant mass. Again, these were taken at R4. The sequential applications resulted in significantly more root mass than the control. As you can see here, there were A's and the control was a B. However, the sequential applications were not significantly different than in root mass than the in-furrow treatments of headline and preaxor alone. So the R3 application did not show a significant increase there over the in-furrow alone. No significant differences were found in in-furrow versus control in root mass. They were all B's. Headline in-furrow followed by preaxor R3 significantly increased plant mass versus the control, but not significantly different than the other treatments. An observation that I think is worth discussion is the increase. This was some work that was done by another student in accretive component, Robinson, a couple of years ago here, Iowa State, looking at seed treatments and looked at the measurables that he saw in shoot biomass and root mass. Increased shoot biomass can provide incremental carbon and nitrogen, which can be remobilized from the increased vegetative tissues to tissues during pod fill. Also increased root mass enabled the soybean plant to deal with moisture stress in reproductive periods, which allows for more opportunity for flowers and pods and seed size. The observation that I would like to point out is when we were showing more root mass and more plant mass, and those yields they were observed as being on that same, don't want to use the word trend, but the observation, what was there. It's worth more, it's worth more research in, because I think that would be a really neat project to look at those type of statistics and that research. But we show that the observation shows that we might have something there that's more worthwhile and research could be done in. Disease ratings. The in-furrow treatments showed that against the control, that in anthracnose we had a significant difference. We had less anthracnose in our in-furrow applications, as well as the sequential applications in the control. Septoria in the lower canopy, the preaxor followed by preaxor, significant difference in all treatments in the lower canopy, and then in the upper canopy ratings, both sequential applications showed a significant decrease in severity in septoria in the upper canopy. The preaxor by itself did show significance in furrow alone in upper canopy development of septoria. Again, this top picture there is that same septoria picture we saw earlier, and this is preaxor in furrow. Defoliation percentage. We see that both in furrow and R3 applications did show a significant less defoliation than all the other in-furrow treatments and the control. A study that was done in the late 70s showed that there's a suggestion that increase in nitrogen input during rapid seed development may be achieved by extending the exponential phase of nitrogen fixation, by extending the exponential time for fixation to increase the photosynthesis and allocate those nitrogen fixations. Another way to increase nitrogen fixation would be to maintain photosynthetically active leaves for a longer time. And that's what I would like to point out, is that with both of the sequential application treatments, we were able to maintain photosynthetically active leaves for a longer period of time, which could be crucial for increasing soybean yields. Now, the return on investment, this first slide I would like to show you is from 2013. Okay, these are numbers I put together for that's when the trial was implemented. Of course, we know that the economic environment today is a little different, and I'll show you those. But using the 2013 Kentucky soybean price for December was $13.20. Doesn't seem like it's been that long ago that we've seen $13 beans. But and I used appropriate prices for the product that were given to me by my local retailer to figure my return on investment. So looking at the say Preaxor treatment number 4 in furrow, we were able to pick up around that $60 an acre, somewhere in there. And then the in furrow plus the R3 was about $128 net return after the cost of the products in 2013 terms. Now let's look at projecting for maybe today. We have a retracement in soybean prices, but I did use 2013 data and looked at what the projected U.S. crop insurance floor price was released last Friday at $9.73, and also made adjustments to the cost of the products for this year. And we do still see a positive return on investment on those treatments with, the Preaxor again in furrow alone around $46, and with sequential application we would see around $98. So even with the difference in the cost of the commodity, the price of the commodity, we're still seeing some good results based on our yield. In conclusion, we'll start out with significant decreases, and we were headline in Preaxor and furrow plus the R3 treatment resulted in less anthracnose compared to the control. The Preaxor in furrow plus the R3 resulted in less septoria brown spot in the lower canopy compared to all treatments. Preaxor was only in furrow alone treatment that showed significance versus the control. Both sequential fungicide treatments resulted in delayed senescence compared to all other in-furrow treatments and the control. Significant increases, we found that the fungicide in furrow plus R3 produced more grain yield compared to the control. We improved our stand significantly with an application of all the in-furrow fungicides showed an increase, a significant increase. Now this relationship between stand count and yield was a little different than what Peterson and Lauer found in 2002. Those authors concluded that there was an absence of significant interaction between grain yield and plant population, and that the soybean performed well at its lowest as it did at its highest. Both sequential fungicide treatments resulted in more root mass development, and the control, and then the quadrus, or the azoxystrobin. Headline in furrow followed by Preaxor R3 increased the plant mass versus the control, but not significantly different than the other treatments. And then the recap of the return on investment for a 1,000-acre soybean farmer, he could realize a $46,000 net return by the in-furrow treatment alone, or a $93,000 return by using the sequential system. Just like to have some time for some acknowledgments with Dr. Chia. The last 4 months have been a very insightful time in getting this done, and great insights and advisement through that. I'd like to thank Dr. Lonkin and Dr. Moore for being here today and listening. Also in guiding the program. It's just a first-rate program you guys have put together. Dawn, thank you very much over the years. Pointed me in the right direction, and all the faculty and staff. My mentor, Dr. Melvin Newman, from a professor emeritus from University of Tennessee. Spent a lot of time with him in the last few years, getting to know a lot about plant pathology. And again, my BASF team in Kentucky, my tech rep, Dr. Greg Stapleton, who in Rocky Napier, who watch over our plots there at Murray. And again, my family, my wife who's here with me today, my kids at home, and parents. So with that, I can ask questions if you so way.
Any questions? How much liquid was put down in the in-furrow? I mean, it may have varied by the product, right?
The rate of the product or the carrier?
I'm thinking in terms of liquid, and I'm leading up to my ultimate question is, did the control plot get an equivalent amount of water as the other in-furrow fungicide products? So
right. So the control would have been this bare.
it's dry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then liquid quantity for the others?
4 gallons per acre of water. Mm-hmm.
How did you achieve that low? I've done some in-furrow stuff, and I have trouble with small flower research getting within a reason.
We honestly, we use 4 gallons per acre in all of our corn starter plots that are on that farm. The calibration has been done with one of the technicians, so I myself did not. Yeah, it's like a red ball system. If you're familiar with like a red ball, the orifice. Okay, you get your pressure high enough, and you'll get your 4 gallons. I mean, we'll have guys squeeze down to 3 gallons. So. No, it's in that probably that 2 to 3 range. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. Is
Sure.
this the sprayer you're talking about?
What's that?
How do you get it in the furrow? Because you're talking liquid, you're
Okay.
talking pressure. Is this a sprayer of some sort?
All right. The planter is equipped with the delivery, what we call a starter fertilizer system, and so we have tanks on the planter. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Should have had a picture.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Not
Yeah.
agronomist.
Put it in with the seed or to the stack?
It's right in the furrow. That's delivered by a Keaton seed farmer that delivers it right into the furrow with the seed.
Is it a dribble or is it a spray?
It's a spray.
So it's spraying seed without the side?
Yes, it's like a T.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the normal time so you can plant it?
We like to start maybe maybe that last part of April. Typically, though, I mean it's May. First part of May, it's time to go. But we'll plant double crop soybeans July 4th. So we have a really wide range of planting dates. But for full season, though, that May is really the time, the second week of May.
I think your results might have been different if you would have planted earlier and older soil.
I think, yeah, I really do. If we look at our weather that we had for that particular year, we were cool and we were wet in June. But yes, I mean, knowing our cropping systems and our no-till, we tend to, our soil temperatures they don't warm as fast as what we if we were tilling. So I would think that we would see more.
You know, sorry. Do you know what your soil temperature was?
No, I do not.
There's a question online. I believe that the early maturity soybean system is popular in the state of Kentucky. Do you have an idea of what type of economic return a producer might see if they included the two-application system in those early soybean systems? Is there a demand for these types of treatments currently in improving production?
We do plant some late group 2s and early 3s, especially as growers are getting larger. They're wanting to spread out their planting time and their harvest. So we'll plant soybeans at the same time as we're planting corn in some situations. Again, kind of goes back to Dr. Lonergan's question as far as, by planting them earlier, do you think we do have a higher risk of disease, especially in our no-till systems where we are planting earlier in those cooler and wetter type soils. The sequential application, the second part of that question is I tend to see an improvement in yield in an earlier bean variety, especially if the weather conditions are favorable for this septoria earlier on. It has a shorter window of growth, and so it has a less time period to make yield. So be able to keep that plant healthier and delaying that defoliation, I think that would in that circumstance, I think it would help in an earlier bean variety.
The in-furrow rate that you applied, how would that compare to the rate of a fungicide seed treatment?
Good question. It's much more, Dr. Chi. Okay. Well, we have to, our surface, the problem with seed treatment, as good as they are, we can only put so much on the surface of the seed. And, we're not only are we treating the seed, we're treating, I think, the seedling. We're able to create a band in that trench it's like a zone. And from what I understand, the way these strobilurins work in the soil is that they adhere very tightly to the soil. So it's not like we put them in the soil and they leach out very quickly. So we're with 140,000 seed and we're using an ounce or I think an ounce per hundredweight, 2 ounces per hundredweight of like Acceleron. That would be a lot less material in the ground as compared to using a 4 ounce or 6 ounce rate of headline in the row. So a lot more higher concentration.
Would you expect more potential for resistance, fungal resistance in soil treatments, in-furrow treatments?
It's something that we have to be conscious of what we're doing, whether it's Roundup, atrazine, or fungicides, I believe. Looking at more modes of action, probably I think 80% of the seed that's planted or sold in Kentucky is treated. So we do have, and it's not just treated with a strobilurin. It has a narrow, a trizol or a metal axle to go along with it. So we have a different mode of action there. Also, if you did come back at R3 timing, you could add. A lot of folks are using a trizol now with their R3 application to try to offset any type of disease-resistant issues that may come just from the foliar applied. So I think mixing those up will help as well.
Question?
I couldn't tell from your table with the application costs. Is that just the cost of the product, or was that also the equipment cost?
As the cost of the product, yeah. So in this study, we were using a 30-inch row corn planter to plant the beans. So I didn't have, if we were going to do this on a split row planter, of course we would have a little bit of a cost just to tube up those splitter rows.
But I meant, so when you're calculating return on investment, it might have been a little lower because there would have been some cost of driving a sprayer through a plot.
Yeah, I didn't look at that.
Versus
Yeah.
those farmers, they calculate.
Yes, sir. And that's why that was one of the reasons why I wanted to put the table in there, because when we do have those discussions, when I have those discussions with growers in the summer, you know, I don't want to run over what I'm trying to make. And so I think there's a mindset of I'm always losing 2 bushels, and that table from Purdue, you know, if I'm making 60 bushel beans, you know, 1.9% is not 2 bushels; it's a lot less. So, yeah, it's a good question. But no, I did not figure that in.
And are farmers going out there anyway and spraying Roundup at R3, or would this be?
No, we've tried to move away from putting Roundup on at R3.
This would be a separate pass just to put that fungicide on.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other questions?
I got a couple simple ones. Thank you for explaining what the R3 stage was, by the way. You mentioned the seed, the Pioneer 94Y70, and you said it was untreated. So did you mean no seed treatment on there?
That's yes. No seed treatment.
Okay.
Which you actually have to request these days. Because
Yeah.
if you don't say it, it's going to come
Yeah.
with a bunch of stuff on it.
Yeah. Now, and that's just the reason that variety was selected. It's a 4.7 maturity. And when you put these experiments together, you kind of have something in mind and something else happens, right? And I was hoping that I had some frog eye. That variety is a little average, less than average on frog eye resistance. I thought, well, maybe if coming back with a bean on bean, I might be able to see something. We could show something on frog eye, but it didn't develop. We got septoria and anthracnose, which was fine, but that's how we came up with that variety.
That was my next question. When you showed the picture of the 2 plots, with you said that you were looking for the yellow in the canopy and you were going to rate them, but what would you rated those 2 plots? Can you go back to that slide? That one.
This one?
Yeah, what would you have rated those 2?
Okay, so the picture on the left would be, that was the lowest rating that I had. Okay, so that was, that was the Preaxor followed by the Preaxor. Okay, and that was virtually no disease there in the septoria. Yeah.
I thought they looked really good.
Well, and then if you look at that, if you look at the rating and you look back at the percent defoliation, it makes some sense too. As far as they had less defoliation as well, they were healthier.
Any other questions?